Ethan Cole didn't believe in omens, but if he had, he might have taken the sudden turbulence, the blinking overhead lights, or the way the flight attendant gripped the seat beside her just a little too tightly, as signs, warnings, a whisper from the universe saying, "Brace yourself, everything is about to change." But Ethan, 37, regional director for Western Tech and notorious control freak, was too busy reviewing a presentation on his tablet to notice the subtle panic creeping. Through the cabin, ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice crackled through the speaker. "We're experiencing an unexpected system malfunction. Please remain calm and keep your seatbelts fastened." Ethan barely looked up. He'd been through turbulence before. In fact, he welcomed it. It was often the only time he had to put work down. Then the lights cut out. For a moment the cabin went black. Then came the drop. Not a jolt, not a bump. A drop. A fall that felt like the floor had disappeared beneath him. The screams came next. Gasps. A baby crying. A woman sobbing too. Rose ahead. Oxygen masks fell like descending judgment. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. He wasn't afraid of flying. He was afraid of losing control. He reached for the mask, yanked it over his face, and stared at the frozen flight attendant, now buckled and wide-eyed across the aisle. He thought about his sister, Claire, and how they hadn't spoken since Christmas. He thought about his father, dead 5 years now, and the voicemail he'd never deleted. He thought about Lydia. God. Lydia. And then the plane hit the trees. When Ethan opened his eyes, everything was too quiet. At first, he thought he was dreaming. The world looked like it had been painted in ash and glass, grey, broken, fragile. He was still in his seat, the belt cinched across his chest, dangling sideways in a torn fuselage. Snow drifted in through the missing wall of the plane. Smoke twisted lazily through shattered windows. Something dripped, rhythmic and wet. He blinked, dazed and unbuckled. Gravity pulled him to what was now the floor. It took him a full minute to understand what had happened. They had crashed. The plane had gone down, and he was alive. There were other sounds now, groans, coughing, someone shouting names in the distance. He moved on instinct, his limbs slow and stiff, his head pounding. He found a young man trapped under a piece of overhead compartment, barely conscious. Together with another passenger, they freed him. Someone else called out, "Is anyone a doctor?" And Ethan realized his hands were trembling. He didn't know how long they were out there. Hours? A day? The survivors gathered near the wreckage, using blankets and scraps for warmth. No cell service, no flares. No idea when help was coming. Ethan sat near the remains of the wing, staring at nothing. He felt numb, grateful, terrified, alive. And for the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't thinking about work, or money, or deadlines. He was thinking about why he'd survived. They were rescued on the 3rd day. A search team spotted the smoke and reached them just before sunset. Cameras, ambulances, news vans, everything happened fast. Faces blurred, questions blurred. Ethan gave his statement to a medic, boarded a helicopter, and watched the wreckage disappear beneath him like a chapter he hadn't finished reading. When he returned home to Boston, everything looked the same. That was the strangest part. His condo was still pristine. His work phone buzzed with delayed messages. His assistant had left a sticky note on the fridge with groceries she'd ordered, and yet he couldn't bring himself to unpack. He didn't sleep that first night. He sat in the dark, listening to the silence, wondering what the hell he was supposed to do now. The first thing he did was call his sister. Claire picked up on the second ring. "Ethan?" "Yeah," he said. I'm home." A pause. "I saw the news. Jesus, I thought you—" "I'm okay," he said. And meant it. Physically, anyway. Claire didn't yell at him for waiting 2 days to call. She didn't say, "I told you so," about taking that flight. She just said, "Come over. I'll make Mom's roast." That night, over dinner and old stories, something loosened in Ethan's chest. He felt like a person again. Over the next few weeks, the world expected him to return to normal, but Ethan found he couldn't. He went into the office once and sat in his glass-walled corner office, watching everyone else move like wind-up toys, checking boxes and pretending it mattered. He opened his email and stared at a message from corporate about restructuring. Then he stood up, closed his laptop and walked out without saying a word. He didn't go back. He didn't quit. Not yet. But something inside him had. Instead, he started walking, hours at a time, through the city, into the parks, down streets he hadn't seen in years. He watched people more closely now, noticed the tired faces, the forced smiles, the moments of stillness. One day he stopped at a bench near the harbor, sat down next to an old man feeding birds and said, "Did you ever almost die?" The man didn't blink, just tossed another crumb. "Twice, once in Nam, once when I fell off a ladder fixing my gutters. What about you?" "Plane crash." The man let out a low whistle. "That'll do it," Ethan nodded. "Everything's different now. Or maybe it's me." The man looked at him. Probably both. One night, unable to sleep, Ethan found himself typing Lydia's name into his phone. He hadn't spoken to her in over a year. She had been his last serious relationship. Intelligent, driven, fiercely independent. He had loved her, but he hadn't prioritized her. She'd said that when she left. "You don't make room for real life, Ethan. You make space for work and deadlines and someday. I need someone who lives in now." He never argued. But now, someday, felt like a fool's promise. So he called her. She answered on the third ring, sleepy and cautious. "Hello?" "It's Ethan." Silence. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," he said. "And thank you for trying, for putting up with the version of me that thought ambition was a personality." She laughed softly. "You okay?" "I don't know, but I'm finally paying attention." Another pause. "Good. I hope you keep doing that." He didn't ask to meet, didn't ask for anything. Just let the words sit. Sometimes reevaluating your life isn't about undoing the past. It's about acknowledging it. 3 months after the crash, Ethan donated most of his suits to a shelter. He applied for a teaching fellowship, business, ethics of all things, at a community college, started volunteering at a local hospice on weekends. He wasn't trying to become someone else. He was trying to remember who he used to be before life became a resume, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was waiting for his real life to begin. He was in it 2 months after the crash. Ethan Cole found himself doing something he never used to do, remembering, not skimming the past like a business report, but actually sitting with it, feeling it. He took long walks along the Charles River, sometimes in the early morning when fog hung low over the water like a memory not yet ready to clear. He brought coffee in a chipped thermos and watched the runners, the cyclists, the parents, with strollers, and wondered how many of them were living with purpose, how many were just passing time. Before the crash, Ethan's life had been all velocity, movement without reflection. A blur of meetings, deadlines, airports, and corner office coffee. Everything had a purpose, everything except him. Now, stripped of routine, he began to piece together how it had all gotten away from him. It started, as most things did, with good intentions. In his 20s, Ethan had been idealistic, driven, yes, but also deeply hopeful. After graduating near the top of his class from Princeton, he had interned for a non-profit that helped small businesses in underdeveloped countries. He'd lived in rural India for 6 months, learning more about life from farmers and shopkeepers than he ever had in school. He'd been broke then, happy. The turning point came when Western Tech offered him a consulting position. Temporary, Low pay, but with growth potential. The first taste of comfort, of prestige, was intoxicating. He told himself it was just a stepping stone, just a way to fund the work he really wanted to do. But one promotion led to another. His suits got sharper, his apartment got sleeker, his bank account thickened, and slowly, without ever deciding to, he stopped dreaming. Instead, he optimized his time, his habits, his relationships, including Lydia. He met Lydia 5 years ago at a leadership retreat in Vermont. She was unlike anyone he'd ever dated. Brilliant, direct, emotionally fearless. She challenged him. She asked him hard questions and expected honest answers. At first he loved that, but over time her questions turned into frustrations. "Why don't you ever stop?" she asked once, after he answered an email during dinner. "Do you even know what you're running from?" "I'm not running," he'd said, annoyed. She had stared at him, quiet for a moment. "I think you are. You just happen to be dressed." Or for it, he didn't respond. By the time she left, he wasn't even surprised, only tired. Now, sitting on a bench near the river, Ethan thought about that version of himself, the man who always looked ahead and never looked in. He wondered how many people at his funeral would have said he was successful, but struggled to say anything else. That night, he dug out an old notebook from a box in his closet. It was a gift from Claire years ago, still mostly empty. On the inside cover she had written, "Fill this with things that matter, even if you're the only one who reads them." He uncapped a pen and began to write, not emails, not reports, just thoughts. He wrote about the crash, about the sound of metal tearing, about the quiet that followed, about the way it felt to be alive in the snow, surrounded by strangers, all of them clinging to the same unspoken truth. This could have ended differently. One morning, while volunteering at the hospice, he met Martin. Martin was 74, a retired piano teacher, and had late-stage cancer. Ethan was helping serve lunch when Martin waved him over. "You look like someone who used to wear a tie every day," Ethan laughed. "I did. Let me guess. Finance? Law? Corporate something or other? Tech consulting?" Martin smiled. "Close enough." Over the next few weeks, Ethan sat with Martin during his visits. They talked about music, books, regrets. Martin had plenty of time to think. "I lived most of my life in half-light," he said once, "never quite pursuing what I wanted, just existing." "Don't do that." Ethan nodded, quiet. Martin looked at him. "You survived something big. That's not nothing. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" Ethan didn't have an answer, but that question followed him. At night, in the shower, in line, at the grocery store, what are you going to do with it? He began to explore the city in ways he hadn't since his 20s. Not just walking, but experiencing. He visited galleries, bookstores, hidden cafes, places where no one knew his name or his title. He found a piano tucked in the corner of a used record shop and sat down one rainy afternoon, his fingers clumsy on the keys. He hadn't played since college. The shop owner didn't tell him to stop. He played for 10 minutes, maybe 20, just enough to remember what joy sounded like. When he left, he smiled for no reason at all. One evening, Claire invited him to dinner with her kids. Her daughter, Maddie, asked him, "Uncle Ethan, were you scared?" He knew what she meant. "The plane?" he asked. She nodded. He thought for a moment. "Yeah, I was. But sometimes being scared just means you know something really important is happening." She nodded, like it made sense. After the kids went to bed, Claire poured them both wine and said, "I'm glad you're still here." "So am I," he said quietly. I just wish I'd figured some of this out before." She put her hand on his. "You're figuring it out now. That's enough." That night, he started another entry in the notebook. There's no switch to flip, no grand epiphany that makes everything clear. But there's something about almost dying that makes you realize how badly you want to live, not just survive, not just succeed, but actually live. I don't know what comes next, but I know I won't sleepwalk through it. By spring, Ethan made his decision. He handed in his resignation at Western Tech. No drama, no fanfare. He used his savings to rent a small cabin in Vermont for a month, one without Wi-Fi, on purpose. He spent the mornings writing, the afternoons hiking, the evenings reading by firelight. He relearned how to cook for joy, not convenience, how to sit in stillness, how to wake up without dread. And one day, after returning from a trail, muddy and sunburned, he opened his notebook and wrote, "I am not who I was. And for the first time in years, I'm proud of who I'm becoming." Ethan didn't believe in fate, at least he hadn't before. But after surviving a plane crash, it was hard to keep telling himself that life was just a series of random events. It felt like there had to be some kind of thread, some unseen hand pushing him toward something else, toward a version of himself he hadn't dared become before. And now, that version wanted to write a letter to Lydia. It started as a thought during one of his long walks through Beacon Hill, a familiar street they used to visit on Sunday mornings, back when they still believed in each other. They'd stroll with coffee in hand, fingers barely brushing, passing open-window bakeries and old couples reading newspapers. Back then, he hadn't known how to be present. His mind was always racing ahead to Monday morning. He was there, but not with her. He never told her that. He never told her a lot of things. That night, after returning from his walk, Ethan opened his notebook and wrote a sentence at the top of a clean page. "I never thanked you for walking away." The words surprised him, but as he stared at them, he realized they were true. She had loved him enough to leave when she saw he wouldn't change. She had given him space to become the man she believed he could be, even if she didn't stick around to see it. So slowly, carefully, he began to write her a letter, not an apology, not a plea to come back, just the truth. "Dear Lydia, I've started this letter 100 times in my head. It never sounded right. So I'm just going to say what I need to say and hope it finds you well. 3 months ago, I survived a plane crash. I know how dramatic that sounds, but there's no gentler way to put it. We went down in the mountains. I was one of the few who walked away. And nothing, not the city, not my job, not even my own reflection, has looked the same since. I thought about you out there, in the wreckage. I thought about the way you looked at me the night you left, and I realized I was never fully with you. I wanted you in my life, but I wasn't willing to make space for a real life with you. I've changed since then. Not in ways you can see on a resume, but in ways that matter. I've quit my job, I've taken time off, I've been writing, volunteering, sitting with old regrets and new questions. For the first time, I'm not running, I'm not writing this because I expect anything from you. I just needed you to know that you were right about everything. And thank you for having the strength to walk away when I didn't. Wherever you are, I hope you're truly happy. You deserve that." Ethan, he didn't send it, not right away. Instead, he folded the letter carefully and tucked it between the pages of his notebook. He knew it might never leave his apartment, but just writing it felt like he had exhaled something he'd been holding for too long. A week later, he visited Claire and found himself sitting in the backyard with a glass of iced tea while her kids ran circles around the lawn. "You look lighter," she said, settling beside him. "I feel it." "You figure out what's next?" He shook his head. "Not exactly, but I know it's not the old life." Claire sipped her tea, watching her kids tumble onto the grass. "You know, I used to worry about you." "Used to?" She grinned. "Okay. Still do, but not in the same way. You were always intense, like you were afraid of being still." "I was," he admitted. "Stillness meant hearing things I didn't want to hear." "Like what?" He hesitated. that I wasn't happy, that I didn't like who I was becoming, that I didn't really know what I wanted. I just knew what I thought I was supposed to want. Claire didn't say anything for a moment. Then, I think the hardest part is realizing we built a life around someone we don't even recognize anymore. He nodded. But maybe that's what second chances are for. Later that evening, as he walked home, he passed the post office. He reached into his bag, felt the folded letter, and paused. He walked past, then stopped, turned around, and went in. He bought a stamp, asked for an envelope, wrote her name and address in careful script, like he was writing in a journal. As he slid the letter into the outgoing mail slot, something inside him loosened. Not everything needed a response. Some things just needed release. 2 days later, Lydia replied. It was a short email, subject, "Hythen, I got your letter. I don't know what to say, except, thank you. It meant more than you know. I'm glad you're still here. See." That was it, but it was enough. That weekend, Ethan walked into a neighborhood cafe and noticed a flyer pinned to the bulletin board near the counter. Creative Writing Workshop, Finding. Voice After Trauma, Tuesdays 6 to 8 p.m. No experience necessary. Just bring your truth. He took a photo of it and signed up that afternoon. At the first session, he sat in a circle of strangers. An artist who lost her sister, a veteran, a woman recovering from divorce, a teenager in remission from leukemia. They shared pieces of themselves, raw and unedited. When it was Ethan's turn, he read from the notebook. The passage was about the moment after the crash, the surreal stillness, the first breath, the question of why he'd survived. When he finished, no one clapped, no one needed to. There was only silence, the kind that held meaning. Someone finally whispered, "Thank you." And for the first time, Ethan felt like his story mattered. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. That night, he wrote a new entry. We're all survivors of something. Grief, failure, heartbreak, fear. But surviving isn't where the story ends. It's where it begins. Maybe I was meant to fall so I could learn how to stand still, and from stillness, choose. And what I choose from now on is life. The cabin sat at the edge of a wide lake, just far enough from town to feel like a different world. Pine trees lined the gravel road leading to the porch, and the air held the sharp, clean scent of thawing earth and pine needles. Birds had returned to the forest. Snow was only a memory now, just like the life Ethan had once lived. It was the kind of place people came to forget. Ethan came here to remember, not just the crash, but who he was before all of it, and who he still wanted to become. The decision to leave Boston had come quietly, like most real changes do, not with some dramatic scene, but in a slow accumulation of small moments. The workshop, the letter, the walks by the river, his growing discomfort in his old world. He'd sold most of his belongings, packed up what mattered, and drove north. No destination, no 5-year plan. Just this cabin, rented from a retired teacher who had scribbled a note on the keychain, "Write something that matters." It was both a challenge and a blessing. Ethan woke early every morning, sunlight soft through the windows. He brewed coffee, slowly watched mist roll over the lake, and spent his mornings writing. Not for clients, not for clicks, for himself, for the people he'd met, the ones he'd lost, the ones he still didn't fully understand. He wrote about the plane, yes, but also about Lydia, about Claire, about Martin, the old man in hospice who taught him the value of stillness, about the version of himself that had spent a decade building a resume and forgetting to build a life. He wrote it all. Some pages were messy, some were beautiful, but they were his. One day, he took his writing into town. The local cafe was hosting a community reading night. Nothing formal, just people sharing their voices. Ethan brought a folded sheet of notebook paper. He hadn't planned, to read, but when the host asked if anyone new wanted to speak, he raised his hand before his fear could catch up. He stood under soft yellow lights, the quiet hum of espresso machines in the background, and read a piece titled "The Moment After." It was about the silence after the plane hit the mountain, about how for a few seconds he thought he had died, and then how terrifying and miraculous it felt to realize he hadn't. "I didn't survive because I deserved to. I survived because I was meant to change. And sometimes that's the harder path, to wake up, to stay awake." When he looked up, a woman in the back was crying softly. A teenager nodded with their eyes closed. No applause. Just presence. It was enough. The next few weeks passed gently. He helped a neighbor repair their dock, chopped firewood for the first time in years, wrote a short piece that got published in a small online magazine. It was called "The Gift of Falling." He didn't check the comments. He didn't track the shares. But he got one email from a man in Ohio who had lost his wife in a car accident. "Thank you," it read. "I thought I was the only one trying to figure out how to live again." That one message mattered more than 1,000 LinkedIn endorsements ever had. One morning, as he walked into town for groceries, he saw her, Lydia, sitting on the cafe patio with a paperback and a tea. He stopped in his tracks. She looked up, smiled, not with surprise, but recognition, like she'd somehow known they'd cross paths again. "Hi," she said. "Hi." He sat across from her. It was quiet for a moment, the way it always was when something sacred is unfolding. "You look different," she said. "I am," he replied. "I liked your piece," she added. "The one in Echo Journal. A friend forwarded it to me." "You read it?" "I read all of them," she admitted. Ethan's breath caught. "I never expected—" "I know. That's what made them honest. They talked for over an hour, not about the past, not about regrets, just now, just this." She was in town visiting her sister, starting over in her own way, rebuilding too. When she left, they exchanged numbers, not promises. That was enough. The last night at the cabin, Ethan stood by the lake under a sky full of stars. No city lights, just quiet, and the slow murmur of water meeting shore. He thought about the plane again, not the crash, but the version of himself who had boarded it. He had no idea what was coming. He'd been successful, efficient, respected, and empty. It had taken a fall from the sky to bring him back to earth. And somehow, he was grateful. The next morning, he packed up the car and slipped his journal into his bag. The same notebook Claire had given him years ago, the one that now bulged with pages. He paused to scribble one final entry before driving off. Sometimes, we don't get to choose the crash, but we get to choose what we build from the wreckage. I don't have all the answers, but I know this. The life I'm building now, it's mine, and it's real. And finally, it's enough.